Professional wrestling. Fighting. These are not the same. While the world of wrestling certainly has itself some tough SOBs, the fights are all predetermined matches with some slick-looking choreography more akin to a convoluted dance than a real fight. But hey-ho, egos and bad attitude and random bursts of anger don't just exist, but almost feel fostered in the testosterone-packed squared circle from time to time. Let's take a look at 10 fights that actually became fights. Number 10, Brock Lesnar versus Braun Strowman. In a Royal Rumble triple threat match also featuring the Devil as well as Knox County's favorite demon, Kane, a small moment took place between Lesnar and Strowman that fans paying attention might have noticed felt very different. During a one-on-one segment between the two big boys, Braun catches Brock with a noticeably rough knee to the head, and you kinda start to see the gears turning in Lesnar's head like, did this oh, he's gonna die. And suddenly MMA Brock reawakens and comes back to put Strowman in his place with a quick pair of jabs, staggering the monster among men, nearly dropping him to the ground. Props for Braun. I mean, I'm sure that was not Brock's best punch, but even a jab from Lesnar, I don't think I'd have a face anymore.
Would you mind going to hunt together with Brock Lesnar?
That would be something that would be pretty cool.
Number 9, Taz vs. Sabu. Taz vs. Sabu is one of the classic ECW long-term storylines, with an entire 18 months of build leading up into the first ever barely legal pay-per-view. Considering the length of the feud and how impactful this matchup would be, Taz was adamant to play it Randy Savage style and plan out this entire match beat by beat ahead of time. Sabu was like the opposite of this style. He was not thrilled at the idea, as he's much more of a call-it-on-the-fly kind of wrestler. These styles clashed for a week leading up to the match itself, as Taz was relentless, and come match time, they were legitimately at each other's throats. You can go back and re-watch and see multiple stiff shots being thrown by the men.
It was tense because they both had different ways they want to do things. Yeah. And they work good together. You know, once they say, well, we're out of time talking about this, let's just go. Taz was trying to do it like a head and arm suplex to Sabu over the top rope, but Taz wasn't tall enough to get him over. Sabu's like, so Sabu, not against Taz, but Sabu's like, fuck, I'll take a chair, I'll fucking slide and fucking stop me. Hook me, do it that way. I'm not staring at the fucking chair. Well, you're too fucking short. Fuck you can fucking do it.
Number 8, JBL versus the Blue Meanie. Why the hell not? Throw in one of the most classic examples of one wrestler beating the blue hell out of another for real. ECW One Night Stand, everybody. You know the drill. Extreme Championship Wrestling gets its first spotlight shown in years with a beautiful little tribute show to what was SmackDown's roster. They just couldn't help themselves from interfering on this night. While the brawl between WWE and ECW wrestlers was planned in advance, I'm not sure JBL's level of intoxication or just general roughhousing was. Whatever the reason, JBL decided he wasn't a big fan of the blue in Blue Meanie and gave him a maroon makeover.
I was always a fan of JBL, so when it came to the One Night Stand, he took exception to it, and we had an incident in the ring where we threw some live rounds at each other. So it was an ugly incident.
7, Bret Hart versus Shawn Michaels. While neither of these two men have ever actually went to blows inside of a squared circle, we can pretty safely assume the stiff-looking shots between the two were not accidental. But it's not actually why the Montreal Screwjob has made its way into yet another top 10 list. That'd be because the outcome of the Screwjob led to a real fight behind the scenes, out of the squared circle. Well, I guess you could call it a fight with an asterisk by it. In reality, it's just Bret Hart finding Vince McMahon, punching out Vince McMahon, and then walking out on Vince McMahon.
Shawn was a great wrestler, one of the best I ever worked with. You know, it's like 35-minute match. You know, tore the house down with a really great match, and the place is going crazy. He likes basically.
Number 6, Lex Luger versus Bruiser Brody, one of the most infamous cage matches in wrestling history. January 1987 saw one of the most legendary names of his day, the giant, hulking Bruiser Brody, take on the young upstart Lex Luger inside the steel structure. Brody was something of an outlaw from the bygone era, wrestling the matches and the finishes that he decided on, and if you didn't like it, look at him, what the hell are you gonna do about it? Being the veteran, Brody wanted to call the steel cage match on the fly, but the Green Luger made the mistake of telling Bruiser how he envisioned the match taking place beforehand. What a terrible call. Brody decided to no-sell almost all of Luger's offense for many minutes, stiffing a lot of his shots and applying a legitimate headlock before Luger pushes the ref, causes a DQ, and immediately climbs out of the cage, getting away from Brody as fast as he can.
We're in a cage match and I don't know what I'm doing, and he's not working, he's just staring at me. So we kind of locked up a little bit and pushed around a little bit. But Fonzie, I go, Fonzie, what do we do? I got in the corner and hit him a couple times. He didn't register, stood there.
Number 5, Kurt Angle versus Daniel Puder. Oh, poor Daniel Puder. Literally all he did was what he was told to do. I mean, I don't know, maybe backstage the tough enough contestants were warned, hey, you're gonna get challenged by a freaking Olympian to a shoot wrestling fight. Just in case anyone's feeling a little ballsy, please do not actually accept, as we're just trying to make Kurt look like a badass. But as far as the TV product Eyewitness tells me, Kurt Angle put out an open challenge, and like John Cena before him, Puder accepted. The difference is Daniel Puder, a total rookie, had legitimate MMA experience and was about 2 seconds away from snapping the arm of a man who is known as the Wrestling Machine into pieces.
You know, the poor kid didn't even know how to wrestle. You know, he was put in a situation where he was uncomfortable, and I totally get why, you know, he was upset.
Kurt Angle beat my coach, Danny Shade. So to be able to see you know, how tough he was, I knew what I was in for.
Number 4, Stan Hansen versus Vader. Sometimes tensions don't even have to rise between the wrestlers themselves for a legit fight to break out, as happened in 1990 when the two top foreign wrestlers of their respective companies, All Japan Pro Wrestling and New Japan Pro Wrestling, main evented a joint supercard between both companies. With the tensions actually being high between the companies themselves and plenty of pressure for the two of wrestlers stiff as badasses to deliver, the two basically had a real fight on accident with just how stiff they worked. Big Van Vader took the brunt of the damage, as Hansen would not only shatter the man's nose with a cowbell, but after a stiff shot to Stan's right ear, Hansen would immediately deliver a receipt that popped out the eye of Vader. Hostilities be damned, this was one of the most respectful, genuine fights inside of a match in history.
We fought to a 30-minute double count out, and we gave the people, they saw one hell of a fight.
Yeah.
And we really went after it. It was in that match where Stan had accidentally caught me in the eye. Boy, I turned around and I felt my eye on my cheek.
Yeah.
It was actually, it wasn't completely popped out, but it was about half out.
Number 3, Goldberg versus William Regal, or Steven Regal as he'd be known in WCW. Goldberg's game plan was very simple when it came to racking up those streak numbers. Step in the ring, murder men, get the hell out of there. Goldberg rarely spent more than a couple minutes inside the ring, and especially rarely hit more than a couple different types of moves. Stiff shots, hard impact, spear, jackhammer, hit the back. For whatever reason, their match was noticeably longer and went much more in the lieu of a Regal match, with technical grappling and some actual wrestling moves and some stiff shots from Regal's end. Goldberg personally claimed that Regal went into business for himself, noting how at one point he was giving him his face and Regal was legit kicking him hard in said face. If you don't know this entry already, did anyone expect William Regal to be the one fighting for real, you know, against this guy? Number 2, Perry Saturn versus Mike Bell. Oh, poor Mike Bell. He really didn't deserve what he ended up getting, man. During a matchup against Perry Saturn on one of WWE's smaller shows of the early 2000s, Bell dropped Perry on his head, and it must have been a real rough landing because Perry sure reacted like he got shot in the big toe. In the most one-sided fight you'll probably ever see in a wrestling ring, Saturn beat the piss out of this poor kid for minutes and minutes and was then promptly handed the moppy girlfriend gimmick. I've said poor Perry Saturn before, but I kind of want to take that back and especially replace it with poor Mike Bell, who prematurely passed away at the age of 37 a few years after this. Rest in peace, good sir.
And what Perry did was just beat him up. And it was really sad, but I'm glad that Perry admitted.
And number 1, the Brawl for All. I mean, it's literally a tournament designed for professionally trained wrestlers to unprofessionally fight. It is, to this day, probably the single dumbest idea in the history of professional wrestling. Injured multiple guys. It was designed to get over Dr. Death Steve Williams, who was one of the first to get injured. And I could keep going, but it also showed just why these dudes wrestle instead of fight. Because when the matches turn into fights, they suck. And those are 10 wrestling matches that stopped being wrestling matches and started being brawls. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comments down below. If you like the video, subscribe to the channel and notifications, ring that bell.